Hello, everybody. This is William Hemphill with the Faith and Family Matters podcast. You know me as a pastoral therapist. I often work with couples to help them reduce conflict and increase communication. And I help people unmask the mask that they have on and show their true, authentic selves so they can walk in the fullness of who God has them and not feeling like imposters. Today, I want to approach you as more of the pastor in the pastoral therapist. The pastor and the pastoral therapist. And I will entitle this for a better thought, Christians voting and the election season. Christians voting and the election season. So we know in the US, we are less than a week away from voting. Early voting has already started in many places, and people have made their choices about candidates. What I see, however, that always bothers me, and this occurs every presidential election, is that at some point I start to see discussions where people of faith start demonizing one another because someone is voting a different political party or for a different candidate than someone else. And Christians start calling other Christians evil, unbiblical, whatever terms you might want to use. And I'll be honest, what's driving this for me is that as an African American Christian, I heard something very offensive the other day. There was a well known evangelist, I will not mention his name, who actually said some pretty horrible things about the African American or Black church. He basically said that the Black church was unbiblical based on positions on the candidates that a lot of people wanted to vote for. So, with that in mind, I do want to give a little bit of understanding about why some, notice I'm saying some, in the Black church would endorse a political candidate. Even as I say this, bear in mind that the Black church is not a monolith. We have all sorts of theologies, all sorts of views on social justice. People vote different ways. Pastors may vote one way, and congregants may vote another way. And people have tons of reasons for why they vote for who they vote for. But just to give a little understanding of some of the underpinnings, the Black church has always been a church about social justice, advocacy, and dealing with oppression. You may say, why? Well, that is because the Black church in America was born in part in the midst of slavery, where Black people were not even viewed as human beings, were being oppressed, harmed, raped, murdered, you name all sorts of evil by white people who called themselves Christians. And so, what many people of African descent is, we took that faith, we learned to read on our own, maybe with the help of some people who valued us, because remember, reading was illegal for people in slavery. So we could understand scripture and we could apply scripture, especially stories of the Exodus, where God freed the Israelites from Egyptian slavery. That appealed to people who were in slavery. And so understand that that is an ethos for the Black church in America. And because of that, that is the lens that we look at things. That is the lens and through which I look at what goes on in society. Because the Black church has had to fight for freedom from slavery. It's had to fight for freedom to not be segregated. It's had to fight for voting rights and human rights and affirmative action and access to public education and all of these different things because people of African descent have had to fight for the right to be fully human within the United States of America. And for some of you that may question that, even in our Constitution, there was a compromise made between the North and the South that basically stated that Africans are 3/5 of a human being for voting, for representation purposes in government. So when you understand that ethos, you see where Christians of African American descent might want to vote for a particular candidate. Now, in the letter that I sent to this evangelist, I also highlighted a couple points. The first point is this, that Africans were present throughout the course and formation of history, of biblical history. And I highlighted that because I understand one of the views that this person has or may have had at one time is that Christianity was good for people of Africa. I mean, slavery was good for people of African descent because it introduced them to Christianity. That's a lie from the pit of hell, as one of my old pastors would say. We can talk about Simon and Cyrene. We can talk about the Ethiopian Enoch. We can talk about Moses and Sipporah. We can talk about so many people who have African descent or of African descent in the Bible. But I also want you to think about something else. Have you ever looked at the geography of the Bible? Where did these events occur? Africa and what we now call the Middle East. The people who occupy those areas are of darker skin. So that simply means that African presence has always been there and been throughout the Bible. The second thing is this, many church fathers who shaped history, Athanasius, Augustine, Origen, Tertullian, some of these other folks, church fathers, helped to shape the church, and they were of African descent. And so I share those things just to combat two myths. The first myth is that slavery was necessary to introduce Africans to Christianity. And so understanding what we said, that's a lie. Here's another lie that I often say was born out of some of the racism of the, for lack of a better term, Anglo-American church. There's a myth going around that Christianity is the white man's religion, and that is prominent in Black communities. The history that I just talked about also debunks that myth. A myth born out of the pain, hurt, and discrimination that people who are of Anglo descent, who are Christians, who participated in segregation and racism and oppression and being slave masters and so many other things, brought that pain that created this other myth that's messing with people. So that's just a little bit about bringing back some of the history to correct some of the stuff that's going on. Now, when it comes to voting, we all know that people have investment in the candidates that they want to vote for. I'm honest, I got investment in the candidate that I have already voted for. But here's the thing. We've got to find better ways, especially as a church, to understand each other instead of demonize each other. Because all demonization does is bring division. And if we keep doing this every political season or a little bit afterward, all you're going to end up is in big church fights between that divides themselves in some cases along racial lines. We all have biblical reasons and emotional reasons. Now, that's the therapist in me. We've got emotional reasons for voting for who we voted for. Probably because we all want to feel a level of safety and empowerment and love and appreciation and opportunity and so many of these other things. And so some of us are voting for who we think will give us some of that. But at the end of the day, if we are people of faith, first of all, we are called to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and acknowledge the Lord. Second of all, we are called to not only love the Lord, but we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I always like to say, when we're loving our neighbors, especially those who are different from us, how do we show love to people who might disagree with us politically? How do we listen so we can understand each other and find a way to make a more better and perfect union? As I start to close, I'm going to share an interesting story. And I think this was back when President Obama was in office and the Tea Party was active. There was a protest, I believe, in Washington, D.C. I think you can find it somewhere on YouTube, where the Tea Party was protesting some things with the government that they didn't like about President Obama and the government. At this protest, some people from Black Lives Matter showed up. And so, the discussions started going back and forth and, how people start discussing. But something interesting happened. The leader of this particular Tea Party protest called who they said was the leader of the Black Lives Matter protest and said, hey, come on up here. Since we're up here, let's have a discussion. By the time they got through discussing, they were looking at each other and said, why are we fighting one another? We both want health care for our families. We both want safe neighborhoods. We both want good education. We both want access to opportunity. We both want safety for our families, friends, and loved ones. We want the same things. Why are we fighting one another? And that might be something for us to think about. Why are we fighting one another instead of thinking about what we want, what we're hoping for, and how we can do something to get that? I'll even go a step further, and this is just came to my mind and thought. Part of what you're hoping for and want for and need and see might be part of your ministry calling. Here's what I mean by that. Something that aches your heart, something that gives you pain. You might be the person uniquely called to bring healing to some of that. And that might be where God calls you to service. Just something to think about. Because at the end of the day, part of the work doesn't matter who's in office. It's what God calls us to do and what do we do individually and collectively to make the world a better place and to share God's love in deed and in word to people. So this is William Hemphill thanking you for joining me for this podcast. Vote for the candidate of your choice. But I also say, love one another in word and in deed. And that starts by listening and understanding each other. And if necessary, drown out some of the voices that want to divide everybody. Take care. God bless you.